Hi, nice to meet you. This group seems very fun and engaging, so I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time joining this group, so and I've already received so many warm welcomes. So thank you for that. A little bit about myself. My name is Eunji Jeong. I work at the Home Depot. It's been a little over 2 years since I joined the Home Depot, and it's actually the longest that I've stayed at a company, which I think it explains how much I enjoy myself at the Home Depot and how much I love the community over there. My previous experience includes UX writing and data visualization. I was an information designer at a company before, and I was also a UX architect, where I honestly had a design team of researcher and designers. So I didn't really get to do a lot of design in that role. So I learned to focus in UX strategy from that experience. And I think the talk that I want to give today is the lessons that I learned throughout all those different experiences and projects that I've done throughout my career. And I specifically referenced the current product that I'm supporting, which is IVR. IVR stands for Interactive Voice Response, and I will touch base more about it in the next couple slides. But before I go into the details, I always like to start with why I am here talking to you. Let's see. Okay. So actually, Havana reached out earlier this year asking if I would like to speak to the topic of UX metrics. And I said, sure. And before I knew it, it was already only a month away. The event was only a month away, and I hadn't crafted any of the presentation material, or I hadn't crafted the story that I wanted to tell. So as I was thinking through the type of message that I want to convey, do I want it to be informative or inspiring? Do I want to talk about statistical method? Because I don't know, maybe someone may be interested in that. Or maybe I can go through case studies, right? And I got a Slack message from one of my colleagues asking that she told me that she saw the flyer that I will be giving a talk about UX metrics. And she asked if I could come to her organization and talk to them. And me being a UXer, I'm curious all the time. I started asking why, what opportunities do you see? And how do you imagine, my talk helping your space? And essentially what she told me was that oftentimes her projects, or when the project cascade down to her team, the designed success metrics, or I guess success is not defined by the stakeholders. And she and her team seem to be having some tough time understanding how they can measure the impact of their projects to the larger organization, right? And what stood out to me was that when there is lack of alignment in terms of what success looks like, it often yields to much bigger sorry, I'm hearing some echo.
Yeah, if you can mute yourself, whoever that is, that'd be awesome.
Thanks. So lack of shared idea of success, it often yields to much bigger design, much bigger, I guess, bad things. like, you don't, it's harder to drive change, like real change and impact through your projects, because the idea of priority and importance of your work can be different from from individual to individuals. And that's why I decided to craft this presentation around the lessons that I learned over the years related to using quantitative metric and working on a product that doesn't have well-balanced KPIs, and finally growing to influence the KPIs that really matters. So I mentioned that I work on IVR. And I want to give you a little bit of context about, what type of product that I will be covering throughout my presentation as an example. IVR is interactive voice response system, which, simply put, it's the robot that tries to talk to you and identify why you're calling the business when you call a 1-800 number or a store, right? It tries to understand your reason for calling and get you to the designed call destination, which can be information that you're looking for, which also can be self-service action, if it's simple enough for the robot or the system to handle. And it could be a transferring to an agent, like, if it's a complex problem that you're calling about, or if it needs more dialogue between human to human, then, there will be a designed call destination or transfer point that the IVR will send you. So my team at the Home Depot, we answered phone calls at all US Home Depot stores and 5 contact centers. We use conversational AI with natural language processor. I know these are some big words, but essentially what it's saying is, instead of you having to sit through the touch tone menu of press 1 for this, press 2 for that, it tries to make a conversation with you. So it will ask, how can I help you? And it will try to understand your words or answers, and send you to the designed path that we have. It offers 66 top-level intents. Intent is the industry term. It means reason for calling. And what it means is, if you were to have a touch tone menu service, then it will go through 66 menu options before you can finally make a decision. But because it's a conversational AI, conversational IVR, it can handle that many different types of intents. And it also offers 8 self-service modules, which means it will try to make a conversation and give you the solution or give you the information that you're looking for without transferring you to a human agent. And we handle about 300,000 phone calls per day, or 120 million calls per year. And in other words, every day, every single day, we get around 300,000 new data points get stored in our database and in our system. Those become, the production data that we can use to analyze and gain insights about how things are going in our system. And the production data mostly consists of quantitative data rather than qualitative data. So I decided to give a couple of examples of production data that informs us how well or bad our product is performing. And one thing that I want to explain a little bit is the call transfer distribution and intent mapping distribution. Call transfer distribution means how many calls are we sending to each transfer locations. So for example, if 10,000 or let's say 100 calls come in today, maybe we sent 20 calls to the call centers, 40 calls to the service desk, and other 40 calls to, you know, maybe like 40 calls were handled by a third party, you know, call centers. Intent mapping distribution is similar to that, where, but, you know, in terms of the reason for calling. So maybe 100 calls came in today. 20 calls were asking about product order. Maybe 40 calls were asking about product information. Maybe another 40 calls were asking about, I don't know, store hours, right? Those are the type of information and data that I work with to make sure that, you know, our product is, our efforts are, you know, focused on where it should be. And I want to introduce you one example of how my team used to talk about data when I joined the team. They actually do it time to time these days too, but it was much worse, you know, earlier when I first joined the team. And it will go like this, right? 5,000 calls got transferred to the appliance department. And, you know, people will throw out data points like this in meetings all the time. And, you know, it got me, it makes me mad, to be honest, because, you know, like, what does this even mean, right? To me, this data point is incomplete because it's not giving me a clear frame of reference. You know, what do you mean by 5,000 calls in one day? Was it over a year? Was it at a single store? Was it across all Home Depot stores or contact centers? You know, the frame of reference is missing when, you know, frame of reference was missing a lot of the times when people were calling out numbers. So it eventually, you know, we eventually, you know, started using more of complete data point, like the Atlanta Home Depot store. So a single store received 5,000 calls on this particular date at the appliance department. So maybe the data point has the clear reference, maybe it's complete, but, you know, I was still having a lot of problems with it because it's not telling me any story, right? What's the meaning of this data point? It doesn't inform the audience, me, of how this data affects our product and our users. And, you know, I started asking questions about that, like, how does this call volume compare to other days? What about to other stores, right? What was driving this call volume? Was there an event? Was there, you know, maybe supply chain issues, or maybe something was broken in our system? How did this impact the business or the customers, which will, you know, give us, the consumer of the data point, more direction where, you know, how we can use this data. So ultimately, our team is moving towards meaningful data or consumers of meaningful data. For example, it could be like something like the Atlanta Home Depot store received 5,000 calls on November 22nd at the appliance department. The average appliance intent call volume in October for this store was 2,000. We think that there's a sale going on that started on this date, which caused this spike in the call volume. And due to the high influx of incoming calls, 70% of the calls were left unanswered. And here comes my lesson number one. A number by itself doesn't tell you anything. It's the story that you tell with the number that creates meanings. So I want to suggest that it's up to the storyteller or, you know, someone who makes the meaning with the numbers that can create the perspective and the frame of reference of the quantitative data. I attended the Learners UXR conference back in 2019, and I met a speaker in that event who became a friend of mine. Her name is Heather O'Neill, and she's a brilliant researcher and designer if you're interested in networking with her. And she talked about how subjective quantitative data could be in that event. And what she meant by it was, for example, the previous example, imagine if you are a manager at another store that's not the Atlanta Home Depot store, who usually handles 5,000 calls every single day in his appliance department. And he saw the initial data point of 5,000 calls mapped with appliance department. Would have he paid attention to find the significance of this particular data point? And could have he thought that, well, that's normal and moved on and never cared to learn that 70% of the customers were left frustrated with the phone, not being picked up, right? So it is our job as UXers to use the production measurements or quantitative data and find out how it impacts the product and the UX. I want to take a break and talk about why we even measure things. Carl Pearson is known as the father of modern statistics. And this is a really famous quote from him: "That which is measured improves, that which is measured and reported improves exponentially." So he is suggesting that we should measure and report the data if we care about it and if we want to improve or drive changes. There's another quote by Julie Zhao, the author of The Making of a Manager. I don't know if you read this book, but I highly recommend it. This quote wasn't technically related to KPIs, but I sometimes, I believe that philosophy is often pierced through many aspects of human nature. She says, the key is identifying which things matter the most. And what this teaches me is that we can't prioritize 100 different things at the same level and not be distracted by that. And KPI is not just a metric, it's the key performance metric, right? Or key performance indicator. And teams need to focus on a specific KPIs that really matter the most in order to be not distracted by lack of priorities. And there are many benefits of having KPIs, but what helps me the most are these three aspects. KPIs often focus the efforts where there are, especially when it's communicated well to the team, individuals can start to see how their tasks and projects are connected to the bigger picture, or driving bigger initiatives. In other words, KPIs drive focus of efforts and directs a team towards the same goal. Next is alignment, because KPIs are like social contract, I think, where everyone on the team is accountable for the result and everyone cares about KPIs. So it encourages communication and collaboration between the team members. And of course, because of the nature of metrics being tracked and reviewed and analyzed, you will detect patterns and trends within the data much easier if you set specific measurements of success as KPIs. And if you start to find the patterns of KPIs, then it's easier for you to control the metric or explain, why a trend or particular event is happening. My team had KPIs when I joined, and I'll briefly go over these. Containment is the percentage of calls IVR handles without transferring the call to a human agent, which saves money on the operation costs, resources, and time, right? The centralization is the percentage of calls IVR took off of channels that have other priorities than answering phone calls. So for example, calls to store or appliance department, for example, if we don't send the phone call to the appliance department, then we are allowing the appliance department associates to prioritize interaction with the customers in the store, which saves the resource and time to prioritize solving more complex or important problems. The natural language understanding accuracy means the percentage of utterances, which means the word that humans use, the natural language processor mapped to the correct intent, to the reason for calling, which pretty much, explains, how well does our system understands human language, which will obviously result in more controlled result of, customer experience. If you noticed, these are business and technology driven metrics. I think it happens a lot of, in a lot of teams and projects where the metrics are set and driven by the business and IT. And these are all critical, metrics to provide a well-performing product that brings value to our business, which helps us to keep going and investing in this product, right? However, they don't guarantee good user experience. So let's look at an example. For example, 50% containment means that IVR handled 50% of the call without transferring to an agent, which sounds good on paper, but we gotta ask ourselves questions like, is this really a win if the caller got frustrated and hung up the phone, right? Which result in bad customer experience. Can we still celebrate the 50% containment, when maybe it's not really, impacting the business in the right way? Or does it really save money if many callers call us back because the first call didn't help them with the problems that they called about? So technically speaking, if 100 people called us and we kind of trapped them in the loop of dumb robot trying to make a conversation when it's not going anywhere, and customers got frustrated and everyone hung up the phone and everyone called us back, and they just went straight to the agent, right? Like talk to the agent. So we transfer the call. That will result in 50% containment. Does it really save any money? Maybe not. And we also need to think about what additional metrics can provide a more clear indication of our success. So here comes my lesson number 2. When people focus too much on a single metric, that tend to blind or skew the reality. I hate to bring this up, but remember Wells Fargo. I feel like they will be forever crucified for what they did with the metrics. But if you're not familiar with what happened, they had a business metric where bankers needed to open a specific number of new accounts, and they did, without the customer's consent or even notifying the customers that they are opening new accounts on their behalf. imagine, but they did it because they only cared about that one metric, right? They didn't care about anything else. Imagine the celebration that the bankers and the organization probably had when they were meeting that metric, when in reality they were losing customers, right? And I'm still bringing that example up, like so many other people in the industry, as one of the worst possible outcome of using metrics. I think the Wells Fargo example can be interpreted in many different ways, and I think there are many, many lessons that we can learn from it. But right now, let's think about how things could have been different if there were other balancing metrics, like maybe like customer approval of the bankers. How many customers would approve or refer the bankers to their family and friends, right? If that held to the equal weight as much as the number of new accounts metric, maybe the result might have been different. You never know. It's always hypothetical situations, but I think there's a good chance that the situation wasn't as bad as it turned out to be. Going back to my team's KPIs, after a couple of weeks of joining the team, I started asking around this question: how are these KPIs, containment, centralization, and NLU accuracy, coming together to drive change in the right direction? In other words, what is the ultimate goal are we driving towards with these metrics? And maybe it's not a surprise, but the answer was, good question, I don't know. It's sad, but a lot of teams, many teams, operate with the metrics that is set by their stakeholders, even before they had a chance to figure out what their product vision is. And I think that leads the team to kind of shoot in the dark without knowing what target we are even shooting for. So here comes my lesson number 3. You need a vision, goals, and metrics, maybe in that order. And I say that because vision is pretty much the key to success. What does our success looks like? We often refer to vision as the North Star. The goals is the milestones that's leading towards achieving your vision. And I think, deciding where to place those goals is called strategy. Metrics can be the indicator that you're on the right path reaching your goals. My team had metrics, but we hadn't collectively figured out where we are headed with these metrics. So we were kind of like getting swished and swifted into whatever direction when we had a new project coming on our way. So I think oftentimes people think that it is product manager's job to create product vision, which I agree, but they're busy. And if you are on a product team and there's no product vision, more than likely, maybe the product vision is low on the PM's priority. They probably understand how important it is, but maybe they just don't have bandwidth, or they have other priorities to prioritize this work. And that leads the team to be kind of lost in the dark without knowing where we are headed towards. So I decided to step up, and I started a workshop series where I try to bring alignment on the product vision and strategy with the entire team. And if you ever get into this situation, and if you want to do the same thing as I did, you will need your team members and stakeholders, and you will need a lot more patience than you can ever imagine. And collaboration tools was really, really helpful for me because our team was remote and we are physically scattered throughout the entire US. So I designed the Vision House workshops. I want to share the critical steps that led to successful Vision House workshop series, in my opinion. The first one is to design the participants. And I cannot emphasize this enough. You know, I think it's really easy for UX designers to only interact with the balanced teams or the PM and the engineers who you work closely with. But the easiest way to create alignment is to include people who have influence on your product in the process of crafting something, you know. If there is a stakeholder that have enough influence in shaping the product direction or product strategy, and if you don't have them on board with the work that you're doing with the Vision House, your immediate team may end up with a vision that's really clear and crisp for yourself. But your leadership will tell you to go the other direction. You just want to avoid that. And I think a lot of you will relate to this as you are all UXers. We need to start with the current state. Let's find the baseline first, so that we can understand where we are at, right? What we are dealing with. I started with the questions like, what are we missing? Like, what are the opportunities that we are not prioritizing? What are we lacking, or what are we not good at currently? Or what are we good at, right? Like, let's not forget to give ourselves a little pat on the back. But understanding and aligning on the current state and our perception of the product, it really helped us to create a baseline where everyone on the workshop could build off of. After that, defining success was really easy because we had already identified where we lack and where we have the biggest opportunities. Finding the goal to compensate for that and improve on those areas was really easy to align on. It was just a matter of crafting the vision statement, that captures all the aspects of work that we want to improve. After we have a vision, we need to develop a strategy, so that we make sure that our individual work and projects will lead us to the same vision or the goal. And once we identify the individual goals and strategy, it's really easy to align on the metric that really matter and that really drive the change that we are hoping to achieve as a team. I think the team started to make connections of how and why the metrics matter when I got to this point. Before, KPIs were almost like arbitrary numbers that we were told to care by the business partners or by our PMs or whoever emphasized it. But after doing this workshop series, we really started to understand, okay, we need to care about these metrics because it's serving us a purpose. So I shared that you need some patience. It took us about a year to go through all these steps. I scheduled weekly sessions and then moved it to bi-weekly sessions and then moved it to monthly sessions. And it was a struggle to bring everyone together, especially because it was a large group and we had multiple stakeholders on the workshops. But the outcomes were amazing. The first outcome was, that I want to note is that we came out of it with the consolidated product vision and strategy that the team shared as a common purpose of our daily tasks, right? So we know why we come to work every morning and we know what we are driving towards as a team. We also created success metrics that kept us balanced and informed whether we are on the correct path to the success without being swayed or swifted too much. And the third one was not an intended outcome, but it happened to be that we developed common language and shared knowledge that helped the team to be more mature and productive in the future alignment conversations. Whenever a designer on my team wants to spend resources and time on an initiative, we don't have to explain too much, or we don't have to spend too much time convincing other people, but just say, just explain how this work will help us drive towards the common vision that we have identified as a team. So my last lesson that I want to share with you is a kick-ass product team measures business, IT, or performance and UX metrics with equal weights, because you need different lenses or perspectives to correctly tell the success of a product, and oftentimes the metrics interact with one another. In other words, in order to maintain the balance, I'm still trying to practice this myself, but try to accompany a metric with other types of metrics when you talk about it. Because, for example, if your project enhanced UX metric like customer satisfaction, maybe there's a good chance that it impacted business or IT metrics as well. Maybe it increased conversion, or maybe increased engagement rate, right? And when you talk about UX metric or other metrics, when you group it with another aspect of metric and giving your audience the full picture of how the success is looking like, that really helps the team to be on the same page. So a summary of my opinions and my lessons that I shared today. Quantitative data is as subjective as qualitative data. So it is our job as UXers to carefully craft meanings behind numbers. The real success of a product cannot be defined by a single metric. So, always remember the Wells Fargo lesson and influence a product vision, goals, or metrics when you see the opportunity. Because I believe that it is also our responsibility to contribute to the success of a team. Don't be afraid to step up when you see opportunities to better serve your team. And lastly, but not least, tell the complete story using multiple metrics and how they affect one another. I think these are some of the lessons that I learned over my days, and I wanted to share that with you. So that's it. I talked a lot today. As you can imagine, we all sit in meetings all day long, and I decided to give myself this task to talk a little more for today. So I'm happy to, open up the floor and talk to some of you.
Yeah, and before we go into Q&A, let's take ourselves off of mute and give Eunji a round of applause. That was an amazing talk.
Thank you.
That was great. Lots of really good lessons. We got some good questions as well. So I'll just be kind of going back and reading from the Q&A in the chat. But if you do have a question, feel free to click on the raise hand reaction. So at the bottom of the Zoom, there should be a bar with reactions. Click on that, click on raise hand, then we can call on you and you can ask Eunji some questions. All right, so Eunji, the first question actually came from Yang. What is the process of critiquing and iterating KPIs within a team? How is that then communicated with other teams and leadership?
That's awesome. Can I hear more from Ing about maybe like a little bit of context or story that you can tell, or where this question is coming from?
I think it was earlier in your talk too. I'm just very curious. I'm always curious about how these conversations naturally occur within your team, and what is that collaboration like to critique and ask those questions that you mentioned about, like, is this the whole story? What other factors are we not considering here? And also, like, when do you decide, like, okay, how we've defined this is the best that we can right now. This is ready to communicate, to lock down until at a later date that we need to iterate further. Like, what does that kind of living document version of a KPI look like?
I don't know if I necessarily have a living document of KPIs. KPIs are typically, they're like strategy where you decide and align on it once and you roll with it because it's, it should drive you, technically should drive you towards your vision. But to, one thing that you mentioned, you asked, where do we ask these questions about completing a data point, right? I think when, I'm heavily influenced by Heather O'Neill's talk about, how quantitative data can be as subjective as qualitative data. One thing that she asked in her talk was, when you see a number on a screen, for example, let's say 5,229, what does that mean to you? It doesn't mean anything. Like, you need context, right? And I think, maybe like my approach to quantitative data or numbers is just like that, right? Like, what is it that I am hearing or looking at? Like, what's causing this? What does this mean? What is the full picture? Because quantitative data oftentimes doesn't provide you why or reason behind it. So, naturally asking questions to fill in those missing gap is, the approach that I take during conversations using numbers. Does that answer your question? I don't know, like, if I make any sense right now.
No, thank you. That definitely added color and helped me understand further. Thank you.
All right, our next question comes from Bai Pai. I wonder if there is any playbook or library out there relative to metrics or measurement stuff. Do you know of any resources like that, Eunji?
Good question. I wish I know more.
Yeah. I think I've heard of if you look up common UX KPIs on Google, I know there are resources out there because I've seen them. Hopefully that helps. All right. Next question. I'm gonna scroll down here. This actually came from me. Did you compile the completed KPIs in the beginning before design work started, or did they kind of come about as the project unfolded? For example, I found that it was hard for our team to come up with the KPIs in the very beginning, before requirements were drafted, before designs were created. So how do they evolve as the project unfolds?
I think totally. I think that's the typical, typically how it rolls. I kind of see it as similar to hypothesis. Before and during and after the research and design phase, so we have some idea, right? Maybe this will impact our product in this way. But as you unfold the research and design, maybe you find something else that it can have impact on. And then you should definitely, the typical process that I take is I call in all the stakeholders of a project and I share that information with them so that we are all aligned on what we are trying to drive with a particular project, so that the idea of metrics that we are intending to impact is shared across all board.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Deja, I see that you raised your hand. Do you want to pop in a question before I go back to the chat? You're on mute, Deja.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So my question, more specific to IVR. So as designers advance in their career, they might step away from, what is advertised as introductory UX work and start to get into more specialized teams. So do you have any advice for someone that may be thrown into a new project and it's maybe an intimidating topic, like IVR is that's not a small project and it's not something that's like talked about in like boot camps, but it's something that's very popular right now. I know a lot of people who are doing IVR and UX, and it's a big thing. So I was wondering, do you have any advice?
I'll just speak to my experience, right? And my approach. I just roll with it. Whenever there's an opportunity that presents itself, like I typically don't shy away from it and just take it, right? I tend to be more on the curious side and I want to explore. I love to explore and go on adventures. And IVR came to me when I had no idea what it meant. I had no previous experience on conversational AI, and it was a fun challenge to me, so I decided to take it on. It's not necessarily the only way that you can design your career, obviously. It's just my approach to jumping around and changing roles and experiencing new things. But if you are interested in going to a specific field of UX, maybe think about how you can get there. Like that could be your vision. You can place a couple of goals and strategize that, and hopefully you can drive towards that. Does that help?
Yes. And this adventurous and daring spirit that you have, is this something that you would categorize as a soft skill in alignment with UX, or do you think it's like more intertwined with being successful overall, technically as a UX?
I want to open it up to the group and hear from you. Like, what do you think?
I think, yeah. Go ahead.
It's a little bit of both, probably.
Sorry, go ahead, Kira.
I think it's a little bit of both. They sound like they're kind of intertwined with each other.
Yeah. I see my quality of being curious helps me a lot being a UX designer, but also, being adventurous and daring to try things on. People kill themselves doing that, right? So it's, I think it can go both ways.
I find that curiosity helps a lot when it comes to problem solving, because it's like kind of like you encounter something that you've never seen before, and it's just like, oh, that's interesting. I want to see, what happens if I do this. So it's like that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna bounce back to the chat and then to Lauren. So the next chat question was from Felicia Sterling. How different were the metrics you had at the end of the process than when you started?
They were a lot different, and sorry I couldn't disclose more. The content needed to go through the approval process before I could share with the public. But I want to say that KPIs before the process was more focused on the value, the business value that it brings, right? How much money do we save? How much time and resources do we save? And the KPIs after the workshop was, it's more evenly distributed between UX, business, and IT. And most importantly, we started to measure customer satisfaction where we didn't before, which is crazy to think about, but we just didn't have a tool or a method of measuring customer satisfaction before. And the fact that we do now, I think, is a huge success.
Thank you. Can I ask just one thing I want to add to that?
Yeah.
So the reason I ask is because sometimes the organizations are really tied to specific KPIs and it's really hard to change their mind. So I'm curious if you came up on that as well.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. I'm sure we all can feel you on that. So for example, the containment is not necessarily IVR specific, but it is a common contact center experience KPI, because contact centers, they want to handle maximum calls with minimum human agents. That's where IVR comes in to help. And containment, we still have containment as one of our major KPIs. I think the difference is that whenever we have a conversation about how each project's impact our product and drives us towards the vision, we don't only talk about containment anymore. We balance it with other metrics that measures different aspects of the success, so that we can have a better understanding of where we are at and where we're driving towards.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Lauren, I see your hand up.
Hey, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more towards how you got alignment more on the vision and the strategy, because I think it's a really great insight that really drives how you can set up the KPIs. And I know I struggle with kind of an organization that's kind of like trying to herd cats. Everybody's kind of going in a different direction.
Yeah.
And how do when everybody has a different definition of what things are, how do you kind of bring that in to create some baselines?
Yes, I think we often deal with that in our researches too, right? If you gather 10 different data points and 10, those data points all direct you in different directions, what do you do with that? I think one thing that was really helpful for me was, the 5 whys, or really understanding the reason or the baseline of their definition of success. So for example, if you invited a business partner, a IT partner, and maybe a product manager, and you asked them what is your definition of success for this product, And if they all say different things, then ask them follow-up questions. Why, right? What does this mean to you? Like, why is this your definition of success? And really try to understand where they're coming from. And I'm sure that you can create some alignment throughout the conversation, because, you know, at the bottom of the core, we all want the same thing. The success of a product means more money, and, you know, more money means, you know, customers keep coming back to us, right? I think you just have to break things down enough so that you can start to see the common grounds, and really, like, you know, try to catalyze around those common grounds when you craft vision and strategy. I know it's very like theoretical and high level, but does that make any sense?
No, that's actually really great advice and very helpful, because I think when you're in it, you kind of get caught up in the noise. And that actually kind of recenters of a North Star of kind of like what to go back to. So thank you. That's actually very helpful.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see. Laura Klubal says, do you have any suggestions for getting buy-in from your stakeholders to actually attend these Vision House workshops?
Hey, Laura, I know you.
Hey, Eunji.
So yeah, getting everyone's time is one of the biggest challenge. And I think that's why it took us so long to go through this exercise on my team. I think very first is you need to build a relationship with individuals, right? Just introduce yourself and tell them who you are, what you want to do, how you want to help them, and how your goal aligns with their goal, and how your work can help their goals, right? I think building that relationship and telling them that you're doing your job to essentially help everyone on the team, I think that really helps to bring collaboration and buy-ins from the partners and different members of the team.
Thank you. That's great advice.
Thanks for asking.
Thanks. Dawn, I see you have your hand up. Dawn, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm sorry. And I wasn't very sure if you had actually said Dawn. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
This is a great presentation. So I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to join. My background is more product marketing, but I wanted to get more exposure to UX concepts. So that's the reason why I joined. And part of what I'm trying to understand is the Vision House a workshop. Is this like a framework that's you know, like an industry concept, or is this something that Eunji, you came up with as a way to, you know, get the vision fine-tuned?
It's not my brilliance, unfortunately. It's I think, I don't know if it's a common practice, but I know that there are multiple ways of carrying out a workshop to bring alignment and create vision. And, you know, at Home Depot, we just call it Vision House workshops. Like I mentioned in the presentation, oftentimes crafting a product vision is considered as the task of product managers. But you know, I think we UXers, I wanna generalize, you guys love to hold workshops, create alignment, brainstorm with one another, facilitate. So, you know, I just see it more it just happened to fit my team's scenario, and I just decided to jump in and design this workshop specifically for my team.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Thanks. All right, we have room for one more quick one. Izioma, I hope I'm saying that right. Izoma she asked a really great question. Is there any way to accurately measure the emotional responses of users? Maybe some of the more qualitative stuff.
Yeah, I think it not only applies to qualitative data, but also any types of data. Making a decision or, learning from one piece of information can be dangerous, right? Just like, if you only think about one metric point and you can completely skew the reality. If you are using with one piece of data that's qualitative or emotionally skewed, that's dangerous, right? So always collect enough data sets until you start to see the pattern or commonalities, right? And also try to accompany with another set of metrics, right? Like another type of data point, like, are there any qualitative or quantitative data or quantitative measurements that the data point is influencing, right? Finding the interaction and impact of different data points is really important when you want to identify the validity and importance or priority of the insight.
That was great. And I think that concludes our first virtual meetup of the year. Let's give one more round of applause to Eunji. Take yourself off mute. Yay!
Yay!
Thank you so much, Eunji.